I can go get them real quick.
Okay, please.
Long before the birth of light, there was darkness.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. What happens when we go further, go deeper into this admittedly intuitive journey into the psychology of the wolf? Where does it take us?
Are you sure you want to hear this?
In a very real sense, we have forgotten not only who we are, but where we came from. A crime literally cuts through the fabric and opens a wound. That wound is a window, a doorway that takes us kicking and screaming where we don't want to go. But we are going to go there in this episode. Looking at social media and its appetite for witch hunts even now in the 21st century, we can see we have barely graduated from medieval mindset and medieval intent, if we have graduated at all. We're not so far removed from the savages after all. And so we look on this case and we think we are elevated so far above it. But really, are we? What you don't read in any police academy manual or find in any criminal psychology is our ancient anthropological connection to hunting, to blades and blood, or what that says about us. According to Ernest Becker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning cultural anthropologist, quote, "Killing is the symbolic solution of a biological limitation. It results from the fusion of the biological level, that is animal anxiety, with the symbolic one, death fear, in the human animal," end quote. So what this brutal, bloody crime that happened in King Street within the student fabric in a neighborhood of Moscow, Idaho, what that tells us is that there is not only, it represents not only a regression back into man's animal nature, but an admission that it exists. It's a reminder that even in the civilized setting of young adults bettering themselves, civilizing themselves, because that's what education is. It's enlightening, edifying, refining, cultivating, polishing, improving, progressing. All of that exists right beside that impulse, where there are other primitive impulses right beside that, and we indulge in those as well. While we are becoming cultivated, other things are happening as well. While our tastes are being refined, other things are being indulged as well. The sexual, the social, and then the most obvious, human aggression. And the animal nature can and often does overcome the cerebral. The beast overcomes the man. Chaos overcomes the system. What we see here in Moscow is that man can degenerate into a wolf and a werewolf, even when in full possession of himself, even when surrounded by all the accoutrements of culture, all of these colleges, all of these classrooms. That can still happen. Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you have subscribed, welcome to the True Crime Rocket Science community. If you haven't already noticed, we are a little bit different to a lot of the other true crime channels out there, and this particular analysis will certainly be probably something you've never heard before. If you appreciate it, if you find it interesting, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So if killing here on this university campus, if this was the symbolic solution of some kind of biological limitation, what are we really talking about here? What was that biological limitation? Whoever this killer is, in what way was he limited? Was it sexual unattractiveness? Was it lack of status? Whatever it was the killer lacked or understood he lacked, the crime was a symbolic settling of scores. Your real death in exchange for my symbolic social death. That's the calculus. Obviously, it's a psychological equation. Now, the reason these crimes were committed was due to ego. It's how the ego turns actual life, real life, into a kind of symbolic construct, which either expands the ego or limits it or causes it to contract. And the ego wants to feed, it wants to increase itself. What is standing in its way? Who is standing in its way? And so what this really is about is the death fear of the ego. Think about that in the Chris Watts case. Someone who wants to expand into an affair, and he fears, it's actually fear that's driving him, but also makes him angry. Becker quotes Otto Rank in the book The Birth and Death of Meaning as follows, quote, "The death fear of the ego is lessened by the killing, the sacrifice of the other. Through the death of the other, one buys oneself free from the penalty of dying, of being killed." End quote. And so again, you might say, how was there any kind of threat to the killer in this case? Well, there wasn't, unless it was a symbolic threat, unless it was the threat of social death. For an enormity of the human story, we killed untold herds and flocks of beasts, and even our own kin, even members of our own tribe, to appease the gods. What it really was a kind of cowardice at not being able to face up to reality by standing on our own. So what did we do? We offered someone else or something else as a proxy so that we can live. Here, take this life and then let me go. We may have forgotten the shameful encyclopedia of human existence, but it hasn't forgotten us. And in a strange way, we seem to be culturally pivoting and swiveling back in that direction as we get caught up in fiction, things that entertain us involving swords and shields, all of these superhero movies, even an entire throne that all of us are obsessed watching, the contest for that throne, a throne composed entirely of bristling swords. That's part of the current zeitgeist. And so we are surprised to see a sword cutting through the fabric of our actual reality. At the same time, social media has urged us back into tribalism as well, where we snarl and bite, where we lash out with words and venom, while underneath those ancient worms and snakes awaken. We wouldn't mind destroying those who oppose us now, would we? I mean, we see America split down the middle, one side baying and aggressive to the other, and the other returning salvos of its own semantic aggression. In this political and cultural context, is it any wonder then that symbolic and semantic aggression spills over, manifests, as it were, in real physical aggression? Isn't it inevitable? Isn't it bound to happen? We saw this on January 6th in the context of something about to happen that day. In the same way, this quadruple homicide didn't just happen on November 13th. It happened in the context of someone getting a new car, someone finishing up and about to leave, someone about to go backpacking through Europe and start a new life in Texas. It happened within that fabric. It happened within the fabric of a football game, a game the Vandals badly lost that crisp, cool Saturday night. So what are we talking about here? A football game, the football game being lost, the neighborhood being not particularly happy about that, in a situation of people drinking beer and moving about at night, late at night. What are we talking about here? We're talking about killing is the symbolic solution of a biological limitation. And that may sound like fancy words, a biological limitation for football players losing a match, but that is what it is. It's some kind of way that one person in a contest with another finds himself biologically limited, somehow inferior. What does that do to the ego? In Becker's tome, Escape from Evil, in a chapter titled The Nature of Social Evil, he writes the following, quote, "It is very clear to us that animal power is the driving motive behind even the most abstract viciousness of men. From the beginning, man as a meat-eating hunter incorporated the power of other animals. But he himself was a peculiarly weak animal, and so he had to develop a special sensitivity to sources of power." End quote. That is the central clue to the heart of the hunter in this story. The wolf of King Road is a peculiarly weak animal in some specific way. He likely lacks sexual agency along with social agency, hence this idea of an emasculated man. As a result, he's regressed into, he's leaning back onto the psychology of borrowing strength. Well, how can you borrow strength? Well, perhaps by using a big knife or having a big knife. It's the psychology of borrowing strength where the shedding of blood nourishes or restores life. This psychology lay at the heart of heathen dogma for millennia and is also the cornerstone of Christianity, that Christ died so that we may live. Is there some sort of rude application of that psychology here, that you four need to die so that I may live? It may also be the base psychology that we are gardening with in true crime in general, where we want to see a symbolic shedding of blood in terms of capturing or arresting a criminal so that we may feel better about ourselves and more alive. If you intuit how ubiquitous, even unconsciously, all these signals and symbols are woven into the cultural ether, whether through our entertainment, through what we do every day, through what we watch, all of this in terms of how do you get your life back? Is it any wonder that someone somewhere will eventually take some of these signals literally, take some of these fictions and weave it into something that is a bit of a misapplication of these ideas? Okay, so how do we apply all of this cerebral stuff to the Wolf of King Road? Well, it's difficult to do without being able to name names or put an actual face to our perpetrator. And so, with that in mind, let's look at the heart of the hunter intertextually. Let's look at high-profile hunters in true crime. Intertextually, how many hunters have passed through the crosshairs of true crime? Well, there is the Florissant rancher Patrick Frazee. I've written a book about him, Murder Most Foul, as well as the bear-slaying mountain man Barry Morphew. In both those cases, there was virtually nothing left of the victims, almost total evisceration of their bodies. The main difference between that and this isn't in the bloodiness or brutality aspect, but certainly in the Frazee case, the intimate connection the perpetrator had to the victim. Frazee had a child with Kelsey Bereth. In the Morphew case, we don't know exactly what happened. It hasn't been proven in court whether the killer lived in the same house as Suzanne Morphew or not. But there is a stark difference here in the remains being turned to ash or powder, whereas in Idaho, the killer simply left them on their beds. Chris Watts, and I've written several books about him and that case, he wasn't a hunter. But what can we impute from a strangling death versus a stabbing death? Well, there is a symbolic aspect that mirrors the perpetrator's own life and how the perpetrator may have felt suffocated by doing to the victim what he felt was happening to him. Suffocating. It feels like a kind of justice, a kind of revenge, a kind of settling of scores. Obviously it isn't, but in the killer's heart, it's just an eye for an eye. That is one of the clues, one of the keys to figuring out these cases. Not exclusively through evidence, but through a kind of symbolic psychology where the killer rationalizes and justifies what he's doing. And in the killer's mind, it actually makes sense what he's doing. Clearly, the Idaho killer wasn't suffocated. He felt something else, something that Jodi Arias also felt. What is the difference emotionally between being merely heartbroken and stabbed through the heart? Isn't it when someone you love doesn't merely leave you? So if someone merely leaves, you might feel heartbroken. They don't just break up with you, but they actually leave you for someone else. I mean, it's one thing to express directly, I deserve better. It's another to express it vividly and directly by actually choosing someone sort of above you, and thus communicating very sharply, very pointedly, at a very crucial time in your life, where it's all about gaining agency, gaining this whole sense of power and place in the world, only to realize you haven't gained anything, you've lost something. And so what is being communicated is, I deserve him, and he's better than you are, which means I am too. He is valid and so am I. Guess what? You aren't. You've come all the way on this journey. And in terms of this journey, I've found my wings, I've found my feet, I've found my fairy tale. But guess what realization you've come to? You haven't. You aren't good enough. Another killer that you might not imagine was a hunter was Scott Peterson. More pertinently, he was a fisherman, but also a golfer. But someone with a kind of DIY handyman aspect to himself. And in that case, the taboo of killing his pregnant wife was similar to the taboo in the Watts case. Both went to extreme efforts to move the human remains far away from their respective homes. Peterson used the water column to bury his victim. Watts used oil. Apparently the killer in this case sees no taboo in what he did, which means that he must have felt justified in what he was doing. Justified because he felt stabbed in the chest. So to reiterate, the Idaho killer simply left the victims on their beds. Perhaps he lifted some victims onto their beds in order to clean the floor under it and prevent blood seeping under the door. But if he felt justified, one wonders how the perpetrator at the University of Idaho felt stabbed to the heart, how he felt that was what he was experiencing. And also, did he lay in bed often? Did he lay in bed feeling powerless and alone as his own fairy tale sailed off north of Moscow, past the Clearwater Mountains? Now let's deal with the fabric of the Idaho murders. We have gotten to know the urban fabric of the neighborhood surrounding King Road very well over the past 40 days. But the dynamics connecting the victims to the fraternities and sororities has also been exposed gradually in more detail. If we rise above the tree line of all of those dynamics and we ask in general, what is about to happen to all the students in mid-November 2022? Well, the year was about to come to an end, the student year, but more particularly for the senior students. It was about to come to an end forever. They were about to stop being university students and start becoming active participants in the real world of work as adults. And so this was really the end of an era, a big milestone in someone's life. Kaylee was actually the only student from 1122 King Road who had actually completed her studies at that point, so much so she had practically moved out. So do you see, there was a sense of impending something. Thanksgiving would be 11 days later, then Christmas, and then it was a matter of catching the next ship when it sailed. All of that beckoned like a sparkling shore, like Gatsby's green light.
He had come such a long way, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it.
We have often spoken on this channel of crimes happening because one person's fairy tale is someone else's nightmare. One person's fairy tale comes at the expense of someone else's. Well, here it is. Someone was about to reach out to their fairy tale, and that was about to extinguish someone else's green light. We don't know precisely how or why, just that last flicker of hope was lost, and that the Wolf of King Road emerged as a result. Does that make sense? It's also why I don't think he will kill again. That terror, that trauma, has been satiated 4 times over. Intertextually, how many cases involve murders or mishaps immediately preceding an important journey? Someone is about to leave, which ramps up tensions in some specific way, and murder or someone disappearing is the result. In the O.J. Simpson case, O.J. was about to catch a red-eye, American Airlines Flight 668 to Chicago. O.J.'s girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, broke up with him hours before the murders. Jodi Arias' beau was about to go on holiday in Cancun, taking along someone else she assumed to be his girlfriend. Jodi was originally going to go along on that trip, but was replaced. Travis was found on June 9th Travis and Mimi were scheduled to travel to Cancun on June 10th, the very next day. In the Casey Anthony case, Casey was originally going to travel with friends to Costa Rica. In the John Benet Ramsey case, the family were due to leave first thing the next morning for Michigan. In the Madeleine McCann case, the parents were about to go out to dinner on the 6th night, also near the end of their week-long holiday, and they were due to leave the resort 2 days later on somewhere around May 4th or 5th. The Chris Watts case also occurred right on the hinge of coming and going. Amanda Knox was wrapping up her studies, and in terms of the day of the murder, her roommates were away on a long weekend, and she and Raffaele planned to make a trip on November 1st as well, to Gubbio. Henry van Breda was supposed to depart for a diving course in Mozambique, while his brother was due to fly back to his university in Melbourne prior to the Losax murders. Can you see, you also have that departure aspect, the impending about to leave thing, overshadowing this case and this perpetrator, but also overshadowing everybody. Everyone was about to depart for Thanksgiving. Everyone was about to wrap up their studies. And so what does someone leaving do psychologically? Well, it reinforces a sense of not being able to control someone, of abandonment, and of being forced to adapt or adjust to a new status quo. And so with all of this in mind, assimilating all of this information, what can we do with this to polish the profile we've already assembled? Well, if we are dealing with someone with abandonment issues, the stabbing may represent the symbolic equivalent of preventing them from leaving, as well as preventing them from socializing with others. A sort of, if I can't have you, no one can situation. In some way, this is a mirror image into the killer's own profile. He has been prevented from doing something as well, and in his mind, it's the victim's fault. He has been prevented from socializing, and in his mind, that's also the victim's fault. And maybe he's been prevented from socializing with the victim, by the victim. And so in that sense, technically, I suppose it is the victim's fault, but really it's the victim's choice. Consider the abandonment aspect alongside taking a journey in the cases we've looked at. All of them involve not just a journey, but the idea of being left behind. It's not just we are going on the journey. No, someone's going on the journey and someone else isn't. Our killer is a lone wolf, which is fine if you're a wolf. Lone wolf humans tend to come from family instability, which is why the wholesome family and friendship setups that we see with Kaylee and her family, as well as between Kaylee and Maddie, that we see so vividly illustrated in their social media, would have felt so attractive on the one hand to the killer, but also so hard to lose, so difficult to let go of, especially if he didn't have it himself. Even the residents of the funhouse seem to be a family of sorts. Yet another iteration of a social setup our killer felt locked out of. All of that was rubbing salt into the wounds of the wolf lurking at the door. When the complex mind is overwhelmed, the animal comes forward, and hardwired into the human animal, where nothing else succeeds, is ordinary meat and potatoes aggression. I can't get my way. How can I get my way by force? Unlike animals, man nourishes himself on self-esteem, but a man lacking in self-esteem can act very much like an animal when he endeavors to get it back. In simple language, when a man loses his confidence, he can be very dangerous. You may not think it, but according to Becker, two aspects that make us human may seem perfectly ordinary and everyday, but they are entirely counterintuitive to animals. The one is regularized food sharing. The other one is cooperation with others. What has turned the young man in this story, in this neighborhood, into a wolf? Probably, using the above construct, the fact that he has not been allowed to share food with others. And in this sense, it's food that is, in a way, something that is nourishing. It could be actual food, it could be sex, it could be something like going to a restaurant or a party setting. And he isn't part of the cooperative dance that is a party or a celebration. He's been kicked out of the tribe, and it's this crushingly self-evident aspect that he means to escape, that he's alone, that he's lonely, and all of that transforms him into a wolf. So do you see, the crime itself isn't so much a railing or raging against that, but actually the killer experiencing his most authentic moment, where he accepts that he is a lone wolf, that he is where he is and can't do anything about it. And then what he does is he embraces that as who he is. He allows the fear to consume him, and out of that is born the aggression, the liberating power and control of his animal nature. In no small sense is this very psychology also an aspect to college life in general. You go there to evolve, to become civilized, but there's no doubt you also go there to indulge in your animal nature. You can do so as gratuitously as you wish. And so that's what this killer did as well. He defaulted to a particular base interpretation of the ordinary and everyday programming that is college life. But he also did so through his frames of reference: a solid blade knife, hunting, and a house on the hill that had haunted him all semester. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.